Hi, today we're going to be talking about Objective 10.3, regulation. Explain how the cell cycle is regulated. Let's start by thinking about this question. How do cells know when to divide? Have you ever put any conscious thought to it? Probably not. Your cells just know when to divide all on their own. Let's examine the experiment that's happening. So if you can see, this image up here has a tray and it has some cells growing in it, but there's space in between all of the cells. Scientists have found the cells will keep growing until the cells are touching each other. So notice like now there's no space in between them. And if they remove the cells, new cells will actually grow until there's no more space in between them. So we know cells know when to divide, but how? Today we're going to talk about the main ways the cell cycle is regulated, and that is through cyclins, regulatory proteins, and checkpoints. Let's start by taking a look at this graph. This graph shows cyclin levels in fertilized clam eggs. The x-axis is minutes after fertilization, and the y-axis is cyclin concentration. So look at that peak. That means like the high point of the cyclin concentration. Does it relate to an event? Yes. Every time the graph is high, mitosis happens. Every time the graph is low, interphase happens. That tells us that cyclins are able to regulate the cell cycle. Cell division occurs anytime there's a high concentration of cyclin. Cyclin is a protein that regulates the timing of the cell cycle. And just to reiterate, whenever there's a high concentration, that causes mitosis, and a low concentration causes interphase. Scientists have done some cool experiments with cyclin, and they've found that if you inject cyclin into a non-dividing cell, a mitotic spindle will form. Remember, mitotic spindles form right before mitosis starts. So basically, anytime you add cyclins, it makes the cell start growing. Now let's talk about regulatory proteins. There are two types of regulatory proteins. We'll talk about internal first. Internal regulators respond to events inside the cell, and these events must occur or the cell cycle will not proceed. For example, chromosomes must replicate before prophase starts. If chromosomes don't replicate, then the cell cycle will not start. Spindle fibers must attach before anaphase starts. And again, if the spindle fibers don't attach, then the cell cycle will not continue. The other type of regulatory proteins are called external regulators because they respond to events outside of the cell. For example, there are growth factors. Those would be hormones produced by the body that tell it when to start growing. And then this is the example from our first slide. There are surface proteins on nearby cells that prevent growth. So a cell grows basically until it touches another cell, and then when it feels those surface proteins, it stops growing. Checkpoints also help regulate the cell cycle. And the main ones are a G1 checkpoint, G2 checkpoint, and M checkpoint. A cell can either pass or fail a checkpoint. If the cell passes it, then the cell cycle continues, or if the cell fails it, then it is destroyed. It basically commits cell suicide or cell death. The technical term for this is apoptosis. And this is a good thing because we don't want bad cells to enter the cell cycle. And this has happened to all of us. When we were developing, when we were like still in the uterus before we were born, we had webbed fingers. And then apoptosis happened to basically delete that webbing right there so that we don't have webbed fingers anymore. Do cells ever escape apoptosis? So that would mean that a cell failed a checkpoint, so it's supposed to commit apoptosis, but instead it continues dividing. Unfortunately, this does happen, and it causes cancer. Cancer is uncontrolled cell growth. A tumor is when a whole bunch of cells divide and basically form a mass of cells. So here you can see our tray picture. Instead of having one nice flat even row, this would be a tumor of cells. If we could control the cell cycle, we would be able to stop cancer. Here's some videos if you want to learn more about cancer or the cell cycle. And please send me your questions, put them on the discussion forum. I miss talking to you and I want to know what you're thinking.